Okay, Dan, is it on? Yeah, we're good. Okay, so hello everyone. So as sort of mentioned before, the general purpose of this discussion is going to be how to get better at debating, or rather, how to get better at getting better at debating. Because I think the longer you do debating, the better you will get, probably, over time. You just go to competitions, you do more debating, you'll just slowly accumulate some knowledge and some tips, and you will become slightly better at doing the activity. But I think I hear a lot of people will ask me things. Like occasionally someone will be very explicit, like, well, how did you get better at debating? Or they'll be like, oh, I really wish I could, whatever, break at Euros or something, but like, I'll never be as good as these people. And I just don't think that's true at all. I think everyone who does well at debating started off being not very good at debating and got better in the overwhelming majority of cases by by actually thinking about how you get better at debating. I think this is a thing that a lot of people lack. So like, I mean, the obvious example that that everyone in this room will know will be someone like MDG, right? So everyone knows probably who he is, and for those who don't, this is someone who more or less started debating was genuinely awful. Like, I remember his first ever competition, he was dropping like 70s, thereabouts, arguing with every judge, had no idea what was going on, but decided, I enjoy this activity, I want to get better at it, and then set about, like, and this is the extreme version of it, but the most ruthless process of self-improvement that debating has seen, or at least that I know of, and then within less than a year was breaking at Worlds, Euros, etc., and then went on to become incredibly successful. And this is obviously facilitated by having, lots of time, lots of money, etc., and these things will help you. But I don't think that the absence of vast quantities of these is a barrier necessary to anyone doing particularly well at debating. I think often the thing that stops most people from getting from vaguely competent at debating to actually very good at debating is just the fact that they haven't thought particularly critically about how to do this. And in a way, I find it weird, because if debating was any other activity, if you were like, I really want to be good at football, you'd think for a second and be like, so I don't know, I play centre back, but I'm shit in the air, so I'm going to do loads of heading drills at training every day. But in debating, nobody ever does this. They just go to the same competitions, do the same things, and go, I guess I'm always just going to lose to this person because they're just better than me. But no one ever self-reflects or does anything in particular. So what I'm going to try and look at in this session is partly, a lot of it just needs to be an ethos. I think the first thing you need to do is to set yourself goals, conscious goals, and write them down. Say, I would like to achieve this. And I think there are various ways you can do it. You can set short-term goals, like I want to, within a few months, because I know I'm going to be speaking at this competition, I want to break at this position. Or it can be, I want to increase my sort of average speaker mark by whatever. But I think the first thing you need to do is set yourself actual concrete goals at a time point in the future that can be readily assessed. So you need to understand what you want to be achieving, when you want to be achieving it by. And so the ways that we generally tend to get better at debating, I'm going to go through all three of them. The first one is just sort of speaking at stuff. The second one is judging at stuff. And the third one is, if you're incredibly keen, doing like drills in your personal time, which very few people actually have the time or the wherewithal to do, and I don't think are necessary. But all of you probably, so for the first one, speaking, all of you are going to be speaking at a bunch of competitions between now and when you eventually get bored of debating or find something better to do. So the question then is, when you approach a competition, how do you use that as a tool? Because a lot of people will approach competitions as a means to an end. They go to the competition and be like, I hope I do well at this competition, and then they do each debate, hoping they get the points, maybe getting some points, and then afterwards being like, well, that was fun, or it didn't go as well as I thought, or maybe it went better than I thought. But I think the first thing to do is treat every single debate that you're in at a competition as a learning exercise. And lots of these things will be very obvious. But as we talked about, firstly, set your goals. These can be sort of like goals in terms of end results, but they can also be very specific goals. Like, I want to make sure at this competition that every time I'm in OG, we have a clear mechanism, or I want to make sure that I don't spend too much time in rebuttal. And in terms of what these goals should be, the first thing you always want to be doing is listening to all of the feedback that your judges give you. Some judges are better than others, some will give better feedback than others, but like in debating, you're not always going to be debating in front of the absolute best judges all of the time. So it is important to understand what everyone thinks about your speaking style. And I think getting as much feedback as is humanly possible, even if you think the judge is an idiot and the fourth they gave you was stupid, it is still worthwhile thinking why the stupid judge thought the stupid thing. Because invariably, if you had done things differently or better, you would have won even in front of the stupid judge. So understanding what it is specifically that you yourself do that is bad and needs to be improved on is something that you need to ask. And I think a lot of people just develop, particularly people once they've been debating for a little while, you will find that you have developed a series of bad habits and you'll be like, but I always do this, or I always do too much rebuttal. I mean, the first thing is, if you know you're doing it, then just stop doing it. Like, make an actual effort to be like, I always do this thing. Once you recognize you're doing that thing, it is imperative that you stop doing it. And some people will say, but I've just always done it that way, or they find it very difficult to work out what they should do instead. And maybe for like the first couple of debates where you consciously try and change your habits, it will seem weird or difficult, or maybe there'll be like a slight dip in your performance, maybe. But over time, you will improve these things dramatically. So setting very specific goals that are tailored to what it is that people generally, judges, your teammates, other people are saying about your debating is useful. Second thing to do is when you've set these goals, if judges give you comments about these goals, like write it down. It sounds like a lot of effort, but like I don't think it really is that much effort to just have on your phone or a laptop like a Word document where you write down like competition, I don't know, the Leeds IV round 1, the judge said, like just one or two things that you think it is obvious that you did wrong and like you can think about a way in which you can improve that. And then when you go into the next debate, just have written down on a piece of paper the things you need to remember. Like number 1, work on my timing. Number 2, make sure I actually explain my arguments. And having that in your mind when you go into prep time and through the debate, and then seeing when afterwards the judge is like, oh yeah, I thought your analysis was really clear, and that was the thing that you thought you were lacking before, will set up a kind of, I don't know, I think it's very gratifying to have worked on a particular thing and see the results of that in action. And I think this sort of self-reinforces. So always making sure that you listen to all the feedback, write down the most salient points, and just like have a think, like chat with your partner. If you're going to be speaking with this person in future competitions, chat with them, be like, what do we think we did well? What do we think we did less well? If I did this debate again, what would I do? You might not want to do this immediately after the call, but just like thinking about it for a bit is always useful. And I think that's the thing that often people go into the room, finish the debate and be like, I don't want to talk about debating anymore. Fine, you don't have to, but just like, it doesn't take very long to just think for a minute and write these things down. And you will get a lot more out of this when you go back on the train on the way back from the competition. You get up your Word document and be like, 3 of the 4 rounds, the judges have said approximately the same thing. I should probably change that in how I do so. Other thing that some people find incredibly useful, but not everyone does, is recording their speeches. So just like on your phone, use the voice recorder app, record your speech, at some point afterwards, listen to it. Because, and we'll talk about this in judging, but often people who speak a lot but don't judge very much often have very different perceptions about what is useful and what is persuasive in a debate than judges do. So people who judge a lot, and judging is an incredibly important tool to develop your speaking ability, will find different things or will understand things at different paces as people giving a speech. I also think the same is true when you self-reflect on your own speeches. If you listen to what you said back, you will probably find that maybe you didn't say things in the exact way you thought you were going to say them, or you'll notice like, wow, I just do this really weird thing where I just stop in the middle of sentences for no particular reason. I used to do this a lot. I would give an argument and I'd stop because I'd be thinking about the argument as I was saying it, be like, I just like randomly in the middle of a sentence just stop and then start again. And like when you're speaking, it doesn't seem like a problem. But then a judge pointed this out to me, and then I recorded my next speech and listened to it. And I was like, wow, this sounds idiotic. So then I stopped doing it. And it's a relatively minor thing, but I think without like, you never have the real capability to assess your speech outside of the confines of the round, not least because also when you're giving your speech, you're also thinking like trying to win the debate as it happens. When you listen back to that speech at some point in the future, all of that is divorced. There's nothing you can particularly change about the round. But if you listen to the debate again, ideally the whole debate, but even if you just listen to just your own speech, there are lots of things that you can improve. And I think particularly in debating, like debating is a game of such fine margins, and it's a game where like everything is really subjective. No matter how much we try and pretend that it's all like some wonderfully meritocratic activity where everyone is super persuasive and the best arguments win, in reality, just doing the basics very well will get you a second and a 78, 90% of the time. This is why when you walk into a room and you see someone who go, they're just going to beat us. Like you walk into a room and you're like, oh, look, our opening opposition is Stephen and Bethany. This is a point we're going to drop. One of the reasons why you think you're going to drop that point is because they don't really make obvious mistakes. They do the basics well. So that's the next thing. Whenever you're speaking in a competition that you need to do, always make sure you do the basics well. All of you know what the basics are. That is not the same as doing them every single time. The amount of times that you will go into a room and you'll be like, aha, I am better than all these people, so I should obviously win this room. And then you take a second or a third from a judge, and you might be like, the judge is an idiot. But equally, you might have a judge that you think is very competent, and you'll feel really angry at yourself afterwards because you lost to people who you think are worse than you. Ensuring that you win rooms that you should win is 99% of the time just by making sure that you don't make stupid mistakes, making sure you do the basics well. So having nice structure, having good arguments, explaining them well, explaining why they beat the opposition, having sensible rebuttal that rebuts the most important parts of their cases, not getting like carried away into one particular area of argumentation that you think is really interesting, but actually no one else in the room does. All of these things are things that you can, just through a bit of practice and through just making sure that you do, will add like a few speaks onto you consistently every single time. And I think that is a big part of doing well, particularly when if you're aiming to do well at internationals. I think the single most important thing that I can think of about if you want to break at Euros or Worlds or whatever is making sure that you don't drop points to teams you think you shouldn't be dropping points to. And the way you do that is by signaling to the judge that you know what you're doing. You do all the basics, you do them very well. You don't just like make a random extension that didn't really stick in the debate and your partner then just refuses to whip it for whatever reason. You make sure that as a team, you're relatively compact and every argument you make has a purpose and everything is done more or less by the numbers. And then it's a question of making the best arguments and moving from the sort of, I am going to finish somewhere on approximately straights in this tab to then how do I make sure that I'm winning these rooms? And that is the second step. And I think people often try and do that before they've mastered the basics. Because you know what they should be doing? And they go, aha, how can I make the best arguments or the most clever analyses? Don't do that. Make sure you have all of the basics done first, and then you can move on to cleverer things. Because there's no point making a super clever argument if your structure is so atrocious that nobody even understands what it was that you were saying. So that's what you should be doing in any given debate and any given debating competition. The next thing is probably to think about what competitions you actually attend. I think some people are wildly unstrategic in the way they approach this. Like, I know NAMDA has like this, from my perspective, slightly bizarre system of obligations, which requires you to attend a bunch of competitions. But even within that, I think you can be strategic about what it is you're doing and how you're approaching this. So a couple of things that I think are important. Firstly, probably just like it is useful to really it is just trivially true that some competitions are much stronger than others and will have better people speaking, but equally they will almost always have better judges. I think it is like, even if you think you're just going to get absolutely hammered by a bunch of people and end up in the bottom room against a bunch of people who you could be in the bottom room with at a tournament much closer to home, if you have a better judge, they're judging that bottom room, that is still a worthwhile exercise. The second thing to think about is like, really, I think the only way you're ever going to get better at debating is by seeing other people who are better than you and thinking about what it is that they're doing. If you're in a debate and you go up against Bethany and Stephen and think, well, I'm going to lose, and then you do lose, probably, it is worth at least listening to what they're saying and trying to think about how it is that they are beating you so comprehensively. And it's not like they have access to some like incredible set of arguments that is beyond everyone else, or some epistemic truth about debating. They're just doing simple things well, and understanding what it is that they're doing in order to beat you is useful. So losing against teams that are much better than you is valuable, and is the only way you will get better. So this means you should, where possible, try and attend the strongest competitions possible. Ideally, when you're attending the strongest competitions, it is useful to go with a person who is, approximately comparable in ability to you, and you think, maybe this is a person that I might like to try speaking at Euros, Worlds, Oxford, Cambridge, whatever other strong competition you want to speak at. Speak with those people. Second thing you want to do pro-ams. And I think do pro-ams in both senses of the word. So the most obvious one is try and get people who are better than you to speak with you at competitions. And maybe this is a time where you're like, this is a relatively weak competition. I can get someone who I know or someone who I don't know. The overwhelming majority of debaters are actually really nice. If any of you go up and ask MDG or anyone else who has done lots of debating and be like, hello, I really like debating and I want to get better. Would you please speak with me at something even though you don't know me? Chances are they will either say, yeah, sure, why not? Just tell me a competition. Or they'll be like, I can't, but I can put you in touch with this long list of other incredibly good debaters who happen to be my friends, and one of them definitely will. So finding people and just asking people, it might seem awkward at first, but just at a competition, just ask someone and say, would you please speak with me at something, or do you know anyone who might speak with me at something, because I really want to get better. I think that's really useful. And when you are in those situations where you are the am in the pro-am, as well as just again, you want to be approaching this with the same sort of kind of detachment about what am I getting out of this activity? What are the things that I will learn about this? Don't just be like, haha, I'm speaking with this person who's much better than me, so we're definitely going to get to at least the final of this competition. And I'll just say, what argument should I run? And then they tell you the arguments, and then you run approximately what they said, and then they whip it, and then, haha, you win, and you get through to the final. You should still be thinking about what it is that you're actually learning about this, what it is that they're saying, and asking them questions like, what argument should we be running? And they tell you an argument. Why are we running this argument? And they'll be able to explain this to you, and you will get an incredible amount about speaking in this regard. The other side of pro-ams, I think also you should do, is the inverse, where you are the pro and the other person is the am. Now, I don't think in order to do a pro-am that you need to be wonderful. I mean, for a lot of people, it's just literally knowing the rules of debating is useful enough when you have an am. The reason why I still think these are incredibly important for your own improvement is because when you're in a pro-am and you are the pro, especially when the difference is relatively large, yeah, maybe you're not going to break, you're not going to win the tournament, but the difference between taking in your middling room a first and a third, or a second and a fourth, is more or less all going to come down to you. Because your am is just going to say some things, and maybe they'll be great, maybe they won't, but what you cannot do is rely on them to do the things that it will be useful for them to do in winning the debate. So essentially, what it comes down to is you, and you have this mindset of, the points that we do or don't take in this debate is largely going to be differentiated by me and what I do. So I think doing pro-ams in this sense forces you very much to consider, how can we get the best out of this? Yeah, so you're in closing half and maybe you're whipping and your am is the extension. And you're like, well, they haven't really said much. So I could just, I'll just say a whole new bunch of arguments and pretend this was our extension all along, and then you get a fourth because the judge was like, well, that was all new and whip. Or it forces you to be incredibly careful about, how can I whip what little extension material there was into something that maybe doesn't win us a debate, but at least gets us one more point than we otherwise would have taken. So I think doing pro-ams is valuable for all of the it is useful to get other people into debating and you've benefited from the activity, and all the nice fluffy reasons why you should do them anyway. But I think there is also a valuable training tool in of itself, where you go into a room and think, well, this is more or less all on me if we're going to win or we're going to lose. My am is never done this activity before, so we count them out. And I think regardless of which order you're speaking out, however you're doing it, if you're extension, it's going to be up to you to sort of frame why this argument is useful and do the majority of the sort of clashy type rebuttal, to make sure that, even if their whip is just repeating some of the words you said, that you still at least, that argument still at least stands in the debate. And I think what my personal advice would be is if you are doing a pro-am, to always speak in the position that you would normally speak in and are most comfortable doing. So sometimes you might have an am who's like, but if you speak second, they'll be like, I feel really uncomfortable doing a PM. I mean, firstly, like, this is the only other time they're going to have someone, or the best time for them to try and do a PM speech, because they have someone behind them who knows what they're doing in deputy. But I also think you yourself, as a team, you'll probably do better, because the AM is probably not going to be great, whatever position they're in. So the biggest differential is you doing the thing you're comfortable in, but also as an exercise in terms of teaching your AM and also getting stuff out of it yourself. Speaking in your normal position will just be like, you will force yourself to do all the basics well, but you're also forced to think about your strategy in the debate in light of the fact that you can't necessarily rely on your partner. So do pro-ams in both senses of the word. Go to the best competitions. Think about, what level of competition it's going to be. If it's a weaker competition, then maybe that is the time you should be doing your pro-ams. You can still learn valuable things by doing them. If it's an incredibly strong competition, that's when you should be making an effort. And I think there is an emphasis here on quality over quantity. Some people, if you don't have the time or the financial ability to go to lots of different tournaments, it is better to just skip ones where you think this is just going to be like the same 20 teams that I see at every other competition in this area. I'm not going to get very much out of it. It would be better for me to save the money and then spend it going to like somewhere else and try and go to different circuits. Like flights from Manchester to Dublin are like 30 quid or something if you book them far enough in advance. Go to other competitions, go to like, try and do like a 7-minute competition over 2 days, like most of the ones in Ireland are. Go up to Scotland, come down to London. All of these things, exposure to different circuits, different people will also make you a lot better. I think one of the problems that I think some people have is, the teams that, for example, never go outside London. There's a lot of like very mediocre London teams who've been debating for ages just because they debate against the same people over and over again, never get to see any different judges, never see, or like the only good people are the same set of really good London people that they just idolize and try and emulate, but do so incredibly badly. Whereas if you go to lots of different circuits, you might see, different people of an approximately similar standard to you who you will take more pleasure in, like beating or doing well against, and you'll also see other good people. So that's what I think you should be doing when you're speaking at competitions. Next is sort of judging. Does anyone have any sort of questions or thoughts about speaking or things? Because we did say, put your hand up if you have things to say, and no one has done so. Okay, that's fine. So yeah, next thing you should do is judge stuff. Judging is really important. And I think for myself, I think judging a lot, I credit quite considerably in myself getting better at debating. But the reason why judging helps is because, as I said before, when you're on the other side of the table, you will, like, what is persuasive to a judge is just not the same as what you think is a good argument. So it will teach you the difference between things like, you might stand up and in your deputy PM give an argument that you thought was just absolutely phenomenal. And you'll be like, no one else in the debate engaged with it, so obviously we win. And then you take a fourth because the judge says you were irrelevant. And when you're on the other side of the judging table, you'll just very quickly you'll just be listening to a speaker and just think like, why are they doing this? This adds absolutely nothing. Or they'll be like, okay, so you're just not going to rebut the main argument that team has just made. Okay, that's fine. If you want to lose to them, that's fine, but like, do your own thing, Mr. Speaker. So you will very quickly, once you start judging things, and judging just not just as an exercise like, I have to fulfill N-1, even in like bad rooms where you think all of the speakers in the debate are terrible and you yourself are so vastly superior to them, I still think you can learn a lot by judging with a critical eye and thinking, okay, if I was in this debate, how would I rebut that argument that was just made, even if I think it's terrible and no one else has made it? Or your sort of expectations for how clashes play out. I think regardless of whether you're chairing or winging, this is still useful. If you're winging someone who is very competent, listen, don't take it as a game of, I have my call and they have their call, so I want to get my call. Or don't do the inverse, which is, I have my call, it's completely wrong, therefore I am an idiot. Like, listen, and think about what the more experienced judges say and why they think those things. Because regardless of whether they're like, ontologically correct about their beliefs about the debate, those are nonetheless the beliefs that they have that are informed from a particular perspective. And it's useful to understand those perspectives because you yourself might encounter them when you are speaking, and they or a similar person to them is judging. So listening to the arguments the team makes, I think the most important difference this will make in terms of your speaking is an understanding of sort of the kind of meta debating interaction between particular teams. So the understanding, like very quickly as a judge, you'll kind of get a feeling in the room like, this is largely a top half debate, or this is a gov bench. And so you'll be already thinking in your mind as a judge, like, okay, so I think opening op are beating opening gov for these reasons. But here are the sort of flaws in their case. These are things that you will be thinking about as a judge. And so these are the thoughts that you should also be having if you were, for example, a closing half team in this debate. If you're thinking about, okay, these are the reasons why opening gov is beating opening op. Is it fine? Yes. Okay, these are the reasons why opening gov are beating opening op. So if I'm closing op, here are the set of things I need to do in order to win this debate. And so what you're able to do as a judge is, because you don't have that pressure of, oh, I need to think of an extension, you're able to just do the, like, I will just adjudicate this debate. But if you are a speaker, like, that is what you need to be doing internally within the debate itself. You're probably not going to write all the stuff down, but you're going to be thinking about the arguments teams make and how they interact in the same way that you would as you're judging, and then thinking about, okay, and so how can I, as a speaker, impact this debate? And just doing more judging will enable you to get a lot better at doing that without having to really think about it. Like, you'll see, like, once people have done a lot of debating, you can just get like a kind of general sense, and you can think about reasons afterwards, but you can kind of just be like, yeah, like opening gov are just dead. Like, you can listen to like the first, generally the PM speech, the arguments they made, and be like, well, these are all dumb, so they're probably out, so okay, fine. And then you listen to what opening op say, and like, okay, these seem more reasonable, so they are winning the top half. And you can make all these things like deductions and thoughts without writing lots of stuff down and taking a huge amount of time within the debate to do so, which means you can then spend much more time sort of answering the questions that your judging will facilitate. So if you're like, okay, this top half, if the debate is about like, I don't know, banning something, and one side is like, oh, we should totally ban it because it's awful for people, and the other side are like, but what if you ban it and then there'll be a black market or people will get more access to it, I don't know, something trivial like that. Then you'll be thinking, okay, so this clash is approximately going to be weighed on. Both sides generally agree this thing is bad and people having access to it is bad. They're just disagreeing on like whether we will or will not have more access to this thing, whether a ban exists. Is like a pretty, intuitive reading of that clash in that debate. And then you as a closing half speaker then go, okay, so this is the clash. We need to make the set of arguments, depending on which side you're on, that definitively proves that there will be greater access or won't be greater access for reasons A, B, and C. So this is, I think we're going to have a session tomorrow probably on sort of explicit like strategy in debating. But I think one thing that judging will help you get a lot better at is sort of understanding as a debate goes on the strategy and the arguments you can make. So I see a lot of people being like, just like we came up with these arguments and they just kind of seemed irrelevant. Like, that is the wrong way to approach debating. The right way is to think of what arguments you need to make or what set of statements you need to prove in order to win either side, and then go, okay, so how do we prove that, banning drugs will lead to greater access on the black market, or how do we prove that actually there is no principled right to put whatever you want in your body or whatever. You work out what the sort of end goals that you need to prove are, and then once you've worked out that, you then work out, okay, let's think of 3 reasons why this statement is true. But you're always working out what the statement is first. And by doing judging, you'll be able to much better evaluate what those sort of general areas of clash should be, but then also which sort of like readings or which like arguments just kind of seem intuitively more plausible than others. The last way you can probably rigorously self-improve if you want to is by doing drills. Like, I personally have never done them, but I know some people who have and who swear by them. So it's probably worth at least thinking about them. And like the most obvious one to do is to just like look at a motion from, I don't know, a tournament. You go, let's look at Worlds like 5 years ago, not too far ago because everything was wild back in the 90s and early 2000s. But like, if you just pick like, you know, let's look at the World's motions from 2010. Let's just look at round one. Let's say I'm on hot. I'm just going to practice and think about it. And, you know, or maybe you will prep an opening gov and then you'll just give a PM speech, record it, listen back to it. That takes approximately 30 minutes of your life. It is not particularly difficult to do. I recognize this is the same equivalence of like, like everyone can spend 30 minutes a day doing some exercise, but basically none of us do. It doesn't even need to be every day. Just like, I honestly think, and this is not especially helpful, but I honestly think the biggest improvement that you can make in your debating is by taking an active approach to improving your debating and making the conscious decision that I want to get better at this, and so I am going to do things specifically to get better at this, rather than just, I would like to get better at this, but I don't really know how, and I guess I'll just keep doing it until I get better. And having those end goals, I think, is incredibly useful. If you're like, you know, I'm in my second year, probably Novi Sad is a bit soon, but I want to be selected for Athens Euros. I want to, you know, go to Athens Euros and be like, you know, approximately in the break in the last couple of rounds, or not be completely dead when close rounds start. I think it is useful to set these long-term goals for yourself. And then, you know, every time you approach debating is like, is there anything constructive I can do with this, rather than just like, it's another boring training session that I'm obliged to go to because I'm like, whatever, undersecretary for something on the debating committee. I think if you want to take the activity seriously and do very well at it, there are lots of things you can do. Equally, if all you want to do is just kind of like potter along and maybe get vaguely better over time, that's also fine. I just think you probably need to make a decision about where you want to be in debating, and then consider, what steps do I need to take, and can I actually be bothered to do that? Do I want to make debating? Do I want to like focus at least some of my time and energy on being debating? Because it probably is true that generally the people who are very good at debating have devoted a huge quantity of time to doing so, either at university or the world schools kids who are like whipped essentially to drill repeatedly for like 4 years before they came to university. So they turn up and it's like, wow, they're so good, but they never go to debating. It's like, no, because they've already done all of the grunt work. But you do need to do it. It's the same as in any activity. No one steps onto a football field and is just incredibly amazing. They're all training all of the time. It's the only way you're going to get better at literally any activity is practice, and particularly directed practice at improving. So that is sort of my general thoughts about how you get better at debating. Does anyone have any particular questions at this stage? Yes, Dan.
So if you are doing a pro-am and you are the pro,
yeah,
how do you try to make sure, so there's sort of two questions on this. One is like, what positions is it most useful to speak in? Would you say that it's easier to just like do what you would normally do, but as if but then obviously you're relying on yourself more. So, but like I speak mostly corners, so whipping a hand that doesn't say anything is kind of difficult. Or do you change what you do for the purposes of the pro-am? And the second question is just like, how do you make sure that? Let's get the second one. The first one is more important.
Okay, so I think I said this, but like, speak your positions, and you're right. Like, if the am says nothing, whipping them is difficult, but it is not the same as impossible. And there are still things you can do to make that extension seem better. So, and if you are generally, like, I think you should approach pro-ams rather than being like, okay, so I've got this person who is an idiot, how can we get the most points possible? Or like, how can I not completely embarrass myself because I feel awful if like Jimmy, who I despise, who is a year below me at university, beats me on tab because I know in my own heart I'm better than him. Like, I think that's just a dumb way of approaching debating. A better way is going like, okay, so I want to teach this person generally how debating works, and I want them to like enjoy the activity, and they will probably enjoy the activity a lot more if you're like a bit more comfortable, a bit more chill about it. So if you're speaking out of position and you're like, oh, just like, shush, I need to think of my extension, so I'm just going to think for 15 minutes in prep time and give a huge extension and hope that it sticks, I think that is less helpful. I think when you're in your proams, you want to be doing the basics incredibly well and focusing on doing that, because that is also something you could teach relatively easily to people. Like, you can teach them, this is approximately how you do structure, this is approximately how you do maths. And there are some things like, I also think debating doesn't just happen in the debate. Like, debates can be won or lost in prep time very easily. If you prep a case that is just dumb, then you have lost. No matter how beautifully you say it, you're just out of the debate if there are other competent teams in the room. So this is also something that you could do in a program where a lot of the onus on sort of content generation will probably be on you as well in prep time, and you'll need to be thinking strategically when if you know you're going to have to whip this extension, you need to come up with an extension that is like plausible, relevant, potentially debate winning, but also that you trust that your AM can give approximately. And so you'll be finding yourself doing things like, okay, so the most important part of this extension that you absolutely must get out, even if you don't say the other thing, is this set of arguments. Or be like doing things like littering them with keywords so the judges don't. So like, even if they say something and you say something different, but if it had approximately the same nouns, most judges will be like, I guess enough of it was in the extension for it to count. And so like this approach to thinking about whipping, I think I'll talk about this a bit more in the session we do on whipping, is also really useful. Like, there is only so much like reasonably you can whip out of something. So making sure and knowing the limitations of that speaker and having that discussion in prep time where you're trying to make sure that the extension given, you are able to whip and you know what's going to be said and how they're going to say it, and making sure, for example, as the debate goes on, if the opening half team says approximately some of the things you wanted to whip. Hello, Stephen.
Hello. I'm just checking how you get on.
We are just doing some sort of Q&As at the end of it. I've more or less finished. So
okay, we're still good. So maybe like 7 minutes, so like 20 past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Okay.
Thanks.
Cool. Yeah. So thinking about these things sensibly in prep time and knowing what you're dealing with and sort of trying to play the game as effectively as you possibly can from a position that you yourself know is disadvantaged will force you to think about debating in ways that I think is more useful. Because sometimes in debating you'll be like, we probably just won because my partner's done loads of debating and sounds like they know what they're doing and said a bunch of arguments that were reasonably well analysed, but you're not necessarily winning because you're not winning to the best of your ability. You're winning because you speak with someone very competent, they say a bunch of arguments and your whip is garbage. Like if everyone else in the room is also trash, then you'll probably be fine. But that is obviously not going to be the case. But also there is a difference between winning a room with a pair of like 78s and then like absolutely creaming a room in round one and taking your like 85s. And again, that's also something that is useful just sort of in your own like development, but also, speaks count at some point in the future when the break comes out, or the speaker tab if you care about these things. So you should still be trying to make sure that you're doing all of the basics, even when you think like, I could just be half asleep in this speech and we will probably still win this debate. Making sure that you win the debate as thoroughly as possible is also useful. It's also useful for when if you go to Euros and you have a bunch of judges who are like, you've got like a 7-person panel and you're like, I trust approximately 2 of you. So then you're like, I guess the dice will be rolled with the other 5. Like they probably will be rolled, but there are still things you can do to kind of signal that you're winning the debate, and doing the basics well and like just explaining in the simplest possible terms why your arguments are useful is going to help you doing that. And those are the kind of skills that you will learn whilst doing proams, but you can nonetheless apply to when your partner is not an AM. Cool?
Yeah.
Okay.
PM speeches, even though you're not part of them, do you know any other particularly useful drills that other people have done?
Okay, so Bethany's doing an OG session after lunch, so she will probably have a bunch of them. The most common one is literally just get a motion, prep for 15 minutes, give the PM speech in a mirror or like just to the abyss, and then record it and listen to it back. Or you can do the inverse, which is you prep an LO speech of a debate that has been filmed, like around the world. You listen to the PM speech and then give your LO. The other thing you can do is when you're giving those sorts of speeches. I think actually like if debates are filmed and on the internet and like the person in the debate, like if it's like a break room at Worlds or Euros or an out round, chances are these people are probably better at debating than you. So you can prep the motion, give the PM speech, and then watch the actual PM speech that was given, and then like compare that to your own. Was it similar in terms of mech? Was it similar in terms of arguments? Why have you done things differently to whatever the speaker in the actual debate did? I just think doing this repeatedly will make you a lot better at the basics of doing these speeches. I think actually, and this is probably one other thing I didn't say, is that just doing lots of debating is useful speaking and judging, because whether we like it or not, there is just absolutely a canon in debating of there is a particular set of like stock arguments that you can make on 90% of motions. And like once you've seen people make them enough times, or once you've given them enough times, you know, there's like a collective action problem argument in this debate, and you know roughly what you're going to say, and you just tweak it a bit so it fits the debate itself, and then that allows you to spend more time in prep time rather than writing out like sort of de novo some argument that like you're completely thinking of new. You're like, I have seen a similar-ish version of this debate, or a debate with similar themes, so I know approximately what I should be saying. I know approximately how I'm going to do that. Will allow you to spend a lot more time thinking about like the more sort of important points in your speech, like how you make that stock argument very relevant to the debate that is going to happen. So yeah, I don't know, just do a bunch of PMs basically. I don't know like MDG used to do them in the morning, famously. Who else has done this? Camillo, if people know Camillo, is another person who started debating, never done a debate in his life in September, and then broke at Euros in June. And the way he did that was by doing basically everything I said, but like in the most keen way it is humanly possible to do. So like, you know, you don't have to do this, but some people, you know, you can make like little spreadsheets where every tournament you go to, you write down every single speech you've taken, and you can get Excel to draw you a graph, and you can watch the numbers go up and go, yeah, I'm improving, so I should keep iterating in this way. You listen to feedback, you write down the feedback that your judge gave you after the debate, and then after the tournament, you read it all through and think, okay, here are the 3 things I think I did generally well at this tournament. Here are the 3 things that I'm going to focus on improving the next tournament. I'm just writing that down in a Word document. And like, this just kind of approach to always asking for extra feedback, always asking for personal feedback, and like listening to it, even if they just tell you one thing. If you're just like, just tell me the single worst thing about my speech. Most judges can probably think for a second and be like, okay. And they'll probably be a lot more honest than like in the sort of general oral feedback where everyone's sort of doing the like, you know, your arguments were good, but ultimately they became irrelevant by the end of the debate. You go ask them afterwards and they're like, to be honest, it was just garbage and I don't understand why you made that argument. Just like from first principles, it doesn't seem to make sense. And just like finding out this, here is the one thing that like completely balls up in that debate, and then you make sure you don't do it again in the next debate. And if judges see you multiple times, go and ask them to sort of compare and be like, do you think that this change that I made was a useful one relative to the earlier round you saw me in? And especially at smaller competitions, chances are you'll have judges that will see you several times. So yeah, just do loads of PMs.
Okay, so 2 questions. The first is, given that there's less of a structured feedback system, what are some ways that you can improve as a judge? So if your ship judge had become a not ship judge. The second is, what do you think the role of improving your knowledge base outside of Disney competitions is in becoming a better debater?
Okay, so I think the second one first, I think it's quite easy. Improving your knowledge base. Again, there is a sort of broad canon of issues that debating cares about. So debating cares a lot about things like queer rights, feminism, IR, but generally only a very specific set of IR. So we really like the Middle East. Recently, we started to like bits of Latin America, but like no one really cares what's going on in like sub-Saharan Africa most of the time for whatever reason. So I actually think that generally debaters are quite bad at a lot of these sorts of arguments. So knowing a bit about the world is useful. I saw a post actually on one of the debating groups where someone was like, freshman has asked me to recommend 5 books to read, and people were like suggesting all these like important canonical text. They were like, go read like A Theory of Justice, or like this like great piece of non-fictional. I'm just like, why? That's just a huge waste of everyone's time. Chances are you will read the stuff and be like, I didn't really understand it, but I learned some nouns that I will occasionally deploy in debates. And like, actually, if you do a debate and you think, I did not know anything about that debate, go and like look it up a little bit afterwards. Like the BBC website has all these beautiful like think piece primers on basically any country you want to look at, any organization. Whenever there's a sort of big ongoing story, if you just read the article, there'll be a link somewhere that will be like the sort of explainer of what is going on in Ukraine. And like just having a vague idea about what is happening generally in the world, or vaguely how some economics works, is useful. But you don't actually need to know very much. And just knowing the kind of issues that come up again and again is quite useful. So like science debates or econ debates are classic examples of where actually no one really knows anything, and actually your best bet is not knowing anything. You just know a few nouns and be like, we're going to explain very quickly why we get slightly more money in this particular sector, and then we're going to spend 10 minutes explaining why this policy is awful for women or something. And then you go, I won, because it's much easier to explain to judges why screwing over a particular minority group is bad. And as long as you can think of some vaguely novel ways in which this policy screws them over in a particular way, most of which you can work out from first principles if you just think about it. And also because, like I said, you should be thinking about, okay, how can we explain that this policy screws over like first generation immigrants? And like, I don't know whether it does in the real world do that or not, but I think if I can prove that it does, that seems like a good argument for me to make that is quite intuitive for judges. So working back from first principles, and then if you know some proper nouns, then good for you, throw them in, and that will probably make you sound more persuasive. But like 99% of the time when you hear a debater who is much better than you talking about IR, and you're like, wow, they know so many things about China. Like, no, they don't. They just like saw a debate once where someone cleverer than them said some of these things, and they're just repeating them. So like, I just like vaguely read the news, and like if there is a particular area of debating where like I'm always shit at econ, or I'm always shit at identity politics, and like learn a bit about that, but I don't think you need to know very much per se. I actually think it's a relatively inefficient use of your time. If you want to dedicate a set amount of time for improving debating, you're better off learning sort of how the game works than the sort of extra frills you can do around it. And on the second one, how to become a better judge, the most obvious way is just do it more. The second way is listen to when people disagree with you in adjudication. So if you're just starting out and you find yourself winging all the time, listen to the chair. And like, it's probably true, like some people are better judges than others. So like, you know, ask the senior people in your society, you're like, I'm winging, you know, Bethany. Is she a good judge? And I'll be like, yes, obviously she is. Listen to what she has to say. If you're like, I'm winging Mr. Rando X, I'll be like, well, like, I guess you can learn some things, but like, you know, just listen and think about it. But don't take everything that every single person says as gospel. But when you are judging with people who are very experienced judges, listen to what they say and think about it. And also ask them afterwards. Like, very few people do this, but afterwards be like, hey, do you have any feedback on me as a judge? And chances are they will say, yeah, absolutely. Maybe after I finish giving individual feedback to teams or whatever, but like, go find your chair judges and ask them like, what do you think I can do better? And they will give you the same tips. I think you can approach it in the same way that you would approach speaking. If they're like, well, you just seem to, you know, discount some set of arguments that this team made, then you'd be like, I guess I need to make sure that I'm having a good understanding of the debate by like making sure I listen to every team or thinking about these things in a more critical way. And like with all these things, you'll just get better over time, but do actually ask for feedback from your chair judges. Okay, we're fine. Arif, you had a question?
Yeah, so, well, it was more about judging. It was making the transition from winging to judging, to chairing, sorry.
Well, I mean, to be honest, like most judge breaks are garbage, and it's just, are you friends with the CA? So like, I wouldn't stress about it too much. But the way you will get better is by just making sure that you're like adding constructive things to the adjudication. This doesn't mean you just agree all the time with the chair. That is the number one thing that competent chairs hate. So like if I have someone winging me and they have a call that is different to mine, I'm like, okay, why is this? And they say something, I'm like, okay, but do you not think maybe this? And they're like, oh yes, I completely agree now, I've changed my mind. I'm like, well, obviously you haven't, you're just repeating what I said, so you're an idiot. I would much rather have someone who is like, I disagree with you for reasons A, B, and C. And I'll be like, well, I don't agree with them, but there's like a competent and sensible reading for the debate. So making sure that like in adjudications, you are relatively vocal. If you have opinions, you explain why. So if the chair is like, so Arif, why did you have the 3-4 this way round? That you actually have a reason for that in your head. If you're just like, I just kind of felt that way, I wasn't really sure about this one, then the chair is just going to be like, they didn't really add anything. Whereas if you have like actual incisive comments to make about the debate, the chair is much more likely to then go and say to the CAs, oh yeah, this person was good. And also again, like so much of it is just like representing yourself. So if you ask for feedback afterwards and be like, oh thanks, that was really useful, then they're probably more likely to say to the CA, oh, I had this guy, he seems like vaguely competent, maybe you can watch him. And then maybe you'll win the CA and won't get promoted to a chair or break or anything, but at the very least you'll get more out of it.
Yeah, but I mean more like improving as a chair itself, as in like the skills which go with the chair, like managing this discussion and how to handle wings, etc. Feel more difficult to work on than, for example, like making competent judgments.
I mean, I think by the time you get to the stage where they're putting it in the chair, you should probably have an intuitive read of how to do it. In terms of managing wings, it's just like, I don't think there's a particular right or wrong way to do it. So everyone has different ways. Some people like to do like, ask all their wings for their call and then not give their own personal call so they can sort of push the discussion in the direction they think it should be. Other people will just be like, you say something, okay, I disagree with you, or like try and make their wings fight each other. Like, I don't think there's a particular right or wrong way to do it. I think as a chair, you should probably have in your own mind what you think the cause of the debate is and the reasons are, and you should be talking to your wings to see particularly where they differ from you, why they differ from you, and like, if you have on your piece of paper that like this person has a first and fourth completely flipped, they've got a very different read to the debate to you, so you want to understand why that is. And if it's done, then you can be like, okay, fine, but you just say it in a nice way. But it's still useful to like understand why everyone has different things. In terms of managing the discussion, I don't know, just like if people are being irritating, you just do things like start a timer, have it on the table, and then if someone is just waffling, you'd be like, okay, I'm just going to stop you there in the interest of time, and then ta-da, move on. And if they're obnoxious about it, then you just go and tell the CA, like, I had this wing, they're an idiot. Like, I don't think there's a particular way, like a right or wrong way to manage a discussion. It's just like how you would manage any group of people in any scenario in your life. I don't think there's anything specific to debating about doing it. I do. I probably shouldn't, but I do. I think it depends. Like, I throw away all, like most of my speaking notes because I'm lazy. But I know some people keep all of them. I'm not quite sure of the merit of that. But like, if you want to, certainly if the feedback is useful, write that down and keep that. If you made a particular set of arguments that you thought was quite good and became useful in the debate, yeah, you can keep that, throw that in your case file if you want to. I think it's just personal preference. Like, I have never done so, mostly because my notes are just like scrawly trash that I wouldn't really learn anything from if I read them again, because I wouldn't even know why I was thinking those things at the time, because I don't write in proper sentences most of the time. But like, some people do keep their notes. I think, making a bit of an effort to just after that, like a lot of people I've seen more recently will do a thing where they'll have like one sheet of paper for the whole tournament, where they'll like write down their position in the debate and like the things they thought went well, things they thought went less well, the arguments they made. If there's anything you think is worth keeping, keep it, but like, I don't think you need to.
This is probably especially true for like if you're prepping PM speeches by yourself, but generally, like, how do you make sure you don't fall down like the cognitive like holes that make you think your ideas are genius when actually they're just complete shit?
By listening to someone much better than you give the same PM. And if you're like, well, I guess I'm just much better than both CO and PM speeches, the answer is probably you're not. So like, but trying to think about why that is. And then also, if you're doing a particular set of things in your own like drills of PM speeches, the idea is you then replicate those things at an actual tournament. And if then judges are like, oh, that was a really good PM speech, then you're like, grand, this is what I need to do. If they're like, no, that was trash, then don't do it. I mean, I think that's just true of all debating. Like, you know, you probably have to, there are a lot of people who think they're a lot better at debating than they actually are. And like, that's probably an easy trap to fall into, particularly once you've done it a bit more and you're like, I'm in my second and third year, and you see all the freshmen and you're like, ha, I can beat these people in my sleep. But like, you know, equally, you're still, you know, you're not breaking a Euro, so you're clearly not amazing. So like, try and learn from people who are better than you, and just be like relatively self-critical and trying to understand your own limitations. And that's why like listening to your own speeches again, or like listening to all the feedback from good judges will help you.
I think
Any more questions? No?
I think we're out of time.
Cool. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go back downstairs and we're going to do a debate. But not just a regular debate, a slow-mo debate.